Hi, it's Debbie here. Welcome to lesson 5 of our remote learning, and we're continuing with the theme of the reading exam, and today we're looking at another diary. It's the diary of Scott of the Antarctic, Captain Robert Falcon Scott, who made an expedition, in fact made two expeditions. This one's looking at the expedition in 1912. And why are we doing this today? Well, we're looking at similarities and differences mainly. So similarities and differences in information, ideas and opinions. It's something that I've noticed people do get confused with in the reading exams. They're never quite sure if a text has explained or has it described something. Where's the opinion? Where are the facts? So that's why we're looking at that today. And we're going to have a look at two different texts, and we're actually going to write our own two different texts, just short diary entries for the assignment at the end. So let's just recap on last week's lesson first. As you know, we need to recap on information to retain it. That's the only way we're going to remember things for the future. So we did the diary of Anne Frank, we analysed the text and particularly vocabulary and language techniques. What I want you to do now is I just want you to pause the video just for a couple of minutes, and I want you to recall what these three, one phrase and two words actually mean. So we covered these in quite some detail in the lesson last week, and these three here. So number one, what does it mean to escape someone's clutches? Number two, what is a bounty? And number three, what is fate? So just pause here for a few minutes. Okay, so firstly, to escape someone's clutches. So if you remember, that's an idiom. So that's an expression of words which are commonly known by a group of people. And this particular idiom means that someone has control over someone else using force. So they're hanging on to you, you're in their clutches. So associated with someone being quite violent, just got a hold of you. Secondly, bounty. It's a sum paid for killing or capturing a person or animal. So that sum is normally in the form of a money reward. So the police could say, okay, there's a bounty out to catch this criminal. Whoever brings them to me will get paid £10,000. So that would be a bounty. And finally, fate. So fate is the development of events outside a person's control. So you can talk about, that something is your fate. It means that you're on a destined path. It's often associated with destiny or sometimes with the supernatural, but you talk about your fate. It's on your destined path. Today we're going to compare two texts, and we're going to compare them by looking at similarities and differences. And to do this, we will look at the format of the text, the language which is used, and information, ideas and opinions. And that's going to be the main one that we're going to focus on today, because many people do get confused with that. The image here, this actually just shows if you are communicating with someone face to face, just how much tone of voice and body language is in fact used compared to words. If you see here, it's only 7% of words which means anything. It's the body language, 55%, and the tone of voice at 38%, which actually conveys meaning. Now, translated into looking and reading text, the words are self-explanatory. The tone of voice is the tone or the feeling that comes from the text. And the body language is the use of the actual language used, so the language features. So you can compare the two, so you can see how important it is to get it right to communicate facts, ideas and opinions. So let's start looking at format or layout. We've done quite a bit of work on this, so I'm sure you're brilliant at this. So certain things that you can identify start from the top, we've got the title. Do both texts, both sources have a title? Do they have the date on them? The author, who wrote the text? The subtitles, subtitles break down the text for us. Some might have subtitles, some might not. The font, the different types of font used. So what is the typeface? Is it a different typeface? Is one Arial? Is one Century, for example? Is it bold? Is it italic? Paragraphs, the use of paragraphs. There could be short paragraphs or long paragraphs. Direct speech. So is someone speaking in the text, or is it all narrative? So is it just narrated? Is it just text, or is there also some direct speech? And finally, images or photos. Have they used an image, or is it just text? And looking at the language, as we said about tone, how is the tone? How does it make you feel? What's the writer doing? Are they speaking from a serious point of view? Is it funny? Is it formal or informal? So formal language, are we using our standard English, or is it informal? Is there some slang there? Is it less structured? And also the use of technical or specialist language. For example, if you're in an art gallery describing paintings, that the artist would have a particular terminology for looking at paintings. In your own vocational areas as well, you'll have certain terminology which would mean nothing to anyone outside of it. So is there any specialist or technical language? Adjectives. We did a lot on adjectives when we did our writing to describe. The use of adjectives can make a huge difference to a piece of text. It just gives us more feelings about the place, describing the colours, the senses we looked at, didn't we? And finally, language features, our standard ones. We've got our simile, metaphor, but of course, so also things like personification, many things that will make us involved more in the text. So the main idea for today is information, ideas and opinions. That's the main thing we're going to look at today. So we're going to look at similarities and differences between these things in 2 extracts, as I said, from Scott's diary. So let's start at the top there. So facts and statistics. I think we're pretty clear on those. Facts, so is it a truth or is it believed to be true? So it's something that's actually said. Statistics, as we know, numbers, lots of numbers there. Point of view, we looked at this before. So whose point of view is the text coming from? Is it the author's point of view, or have they interviewed someone? So it's someone else's point of view, either a member of the public or someone famous. So is it coming from a different point of view? Explanations. So does this text explain something? Or descriptions, does it describe? Now I know a lot of you were a little bit confused with last week's assignment, looking at does it explain or does it describe? And something I'm just going to touch on a little bit more in a minute. Expressions of emotion and feelings. So how does it, like I say, how does it make you feel? Emotive language. Is there a good use of emotive language? Discussions. Does it discuss a subject? And beliefs. So that's to do with opinions, and we often talk about opinions. Our opinions or the opinions of the person that has written the article. So let's look more closely at that difference between describing and explaining. I'm using an example of the London Eye here, for example. So describing is when you build up a picture of something, you visualize something, and it's focusing on feelings and sensations. So it's not just facts, it's focusing on actual feelings. You're describing something, you're visualizing it. To do that, the article will be using figurative language, such as metaphors, similes, personification. It'll be describing feelings and sensations, and showing rather than telling. So here's the example for that from that. So From the top of the London Eye, London looks like a toy town, a perfect miniature. Toy cars move smoothly and silently as if driven by an invisible hand. The Thames curves beneath you, blue and twinkling in the sun, or, on a cloudy day, steely grey. Big Ben towers over the Houses of Parliament, and St James's Park sweeps away towards Buckingham Palace. So you can see there's a lot of description there. It's describing what's going on. So it's got colours there, it's talking about the weather, landmarks, and you're using similes. So yeah, lots of good language techniques there to describe. Now let's compare that. If you were going to explain about the London Eye, explaining goes into detail, specific detail. It's not describing, it's not giving you all the figurative language, it's giving you facts, but it's giving you detail of facts, and that's the difference. So here we have the example. Instead of being suspended and swinging, the passenger capsules turn within circular mountain rings fixed to the outside of the main rim. As the wheel rotates, the capsules also rotate within their mountain rings to remain horizontal. If the capsules didn't rotate, by the time your capsule went around the wheel, you and your friends would be upside down. Each capsule has its own heating and cooling system, bench seating, and is fitted with special glass that can handle weather fluctuations. There we go. You can see the difference, can't you? There's very direct language. It's explaining in lots of facts, but explaining in detail, and that's why it's a text that explains. So hopefully you can see the difference now between describing something with figurative language and explaining something which goes, really gets into the detail of that subject. Okay, so let's move on to the extracts that we're going to look at today. The Diary of Robert Falcon Scott, also known as Captain Scott or Scott of the Antarctic. You may have covered this at some stage in history. It's a very famous story. Here are some facts. So he was an explorer. He was in the British Navy, and he led 2 expeditions to the Antarctic, trying to reach the South Pole from their base camp. Unfortunately, he was narrowly beaten to the South Pole by another explorer called Roald Amundsen from Norway, and it was only a month before. So can you imagine, you travel all that way and someone's got there before you a month before. Sadly, it's such a grueling journey, it's such difficult conditions that Scott actually died, and so did the rest of his team shown here. So all 5 of them died on the way back to their base camp. So they realised they hadn't made it, and they decided to make their way back, but it was just the conditions were just too difficult, and they didn't make it. And within 20 kilometres of getting back, they died in stages, actually, which I'll show you in the next slide. Their bodies weren't actually discovered until November that year. But they discovered many things, including a diary, final entry written 29th of March, the day he died, and he had included letters as well to his family, commander, and to the public. And he was a national hero, and there are many statues to Scott around Great Britain that you might come across. So a national hero, because although he wasn't the first to the South Pole, he was certainly a very well respected adventurer. This is the diagram of what exactly happened. So on the right hand side you can see the journey of Amundsen from Norway, and he was the successful one. So he took a different route, and that obviously made all the difference. So he went from the Bay of Wales up there at the top, right down to the South Pole, and reached there on the 14th of December 1911. Scott, on the other hand, decided to go from Ross Island, and this shows that he actually reached the South Pole on the 17th of January 1912, realised he wasn't successful, and then they slowly started making their way back, and you can see that it details here when each of them died, very sadly. So the first one to die was Evans on the 17th of February, followed by oats on the 17th of March, and finally the last three all died at the same location on the 30th of March. So actually his diary day, entry was the day before he died. Let's look at some vocabulary we're going to come across in our extracts that we're about to read. So the first thing is a very strange thing called pemmican, something I've never heard of actually, and it's this awful brown thing that you can see on the top right photo. It looks a little bit like beef jerky to me, which is actually quite nice, but this is made of tallow, dried meat and dried berries, and historically it's a food that is made by the indigenous community of North America. So the native Indian community actually still make this pemmican. Very nutritious, easy to carry, and won't perish. So the perfect food for them to take. And also it's going to talk about a sledge, and the sledge that you might think of is something that you might go on down a hill on a snowy day, but these types of sledges you can see here in the photo, very large practical sledges to carry all their provisions that they required. Usually you would think of a large sledge pulled by dogs or horses, but sadly they discovered that the dogs and horses wouldn't be able to go any further as soon as they left camp, because it was far too cold. The conditions were so bad. So Scott and four of his teammates were the only ones that went in the end, and you can see actually pulling the sledge behind them. I'm not sure this is actually Scott and his team themselves, but this would have been the kind of thing that they were doing. Harnesses around their waists and pulling the sledges themselves. So you can imagine this would have taken a lot of energy, and again probably would have contributed to them failing on getting home again and perishing. So let's look at the first extract or source. Sometimes it's referred to as a source and sometimes as an extract, and this is what you would find in a reading exam. So looking at source 1, Monday, March the 5th, 1912. Lunch. Regret to say, going from bad to worse. We got a slant of wind yesterday afternoon, and going on 5 hours we converted our wretched morning run of 3.5 miles into something over 9. We went to bed on a cup of cocoa and pemmican solid with a chill off. The result is telling on all, but mainly on Oates, whose feet are in a wretched condition. One swelled up tremendously last night, and he is very lame this morning. Sledge capsized twice. We pulled on foot, covering about 5.5 miles. We none of us expected these terribly low temperatures, and the rest of us, Wilson is feeling the most. The others, all of them, are unendingly cheerful when in the tent. So, firstly, lunch. He's just saying that's the time of day he's writing this, lunch. And Scott wrote a lot of his diaries at lunchtime because that was the warmest time of the day. And it was so cold that even the ink in his pen froze and his hands just wouldn't move because of the cold. So he had to find a sheltered place in which he could write his diary, and lunch seems to have been the best time of day. Let's look at some of the language here. So you can see it said about pemmican there, pemmican solid they call it here. So that's that type of food they were using. And the sledge, it talks about the sledge capsizing, so turning over. It would have just spilled out all of their provisions. Again, the effort that it must have taken to turn that back over and load everything again. And they are pulling it on foot, covering such huge distances in thick snow and blizzard conditions at times. When he talks about a slant of wind, that's the wind actually driving into their faces. And it says here, it's actually, it means that instead of taking 5 hours, it actually took 9. So just grueling conditions. He talks about wretched twice. He talks about wretched, so just so terrible, so bad, these conditions. Oates, one of his team there, is talking about his legs or his feet. So that would have been frostbite that he would have had, which again is so cold that it causes the toes to turn black and eventually fall off. So really terrible thing to happen. When it says he's very lame, it's a term they used to use a lot in the olden days. If you think this is written in 1912, it's actually quite a disrespectful term nowadays, and it's only really used for animals. So you might hear that a horse goes lame, so it means that they have difficulty walking, they're disabled. So, but in those days it was fine to refer to someone as lame, but you wouldn't nowadays. It wouldn't be politically correct to do that. And that's about it there. As you can see, the temperature and the weather conditions are spoken about a lot. So that could be a similarity if we look at the next extract. So it's about the weather, and also it talks a lot about the time it takes to travel. Again, we can see whether that's a similarity in the next extract. But he's saying, even though it's a terrible thing, they're still cheerful when in the tent, because that's when they're warm and together and they've achieved something. Okay, so moving on to the next day, Tuesday, March the 6th, 1912. Again, lunch. We did a little better with help of wind yesterday afternoon, finishing 9.5 miles for the day and 27 miles from depot. But this morning things have been awful. It was warm in the night, and for the first time during the journey, I overslept myself by more than an hour. Then we were slow with foot gear. Then, pulling with all our might for our lives, we could scarcely advance at rate of 1 mile an hour. Then it grew thick, and 3 times we had to get out of harness to search for tracks. The result is something less than 3.5 miles for the forenoon. The sun is shining now, and the wind gone. Poor Oates is unable to pull, sits on the sledge when we are track searching. He is wonderfully plucky, as his feet must be giving him great pain. He makes no complaint, but his spirits only come up in spurts now, and he grows more silent in the tent. So you can see a little bit more forlorn on this slide. But again, he's talking about the weather. So there is the similarity there. He's talking about, today they had the help of the wind. Yesterday, the wind was slanting in their faces. Today, they had the help of the wind. The sun is shining, so that's good. It's a good thing. And he says, mentions Oates again, poor old Oates. His feet again are causing him great pain, so there's a similarity. And he's wonderfully plucky. However, it does say that he has grown more silent in the tent. So this actually shows that his mood is darkening. So that's a difference. So whereas they were very happy in the tent yesterday, it's growing more silent. So they're not feeling so good about themselves. Just have a look at a little bit of vocabulary here, in case you don't know. Second line down, depot. So the depot is their main base, basically. They're talking about their headquarters. So they finished at 27 miles from their headquarters there. Moving on down, when it says, then it grew thick, and 3 times we had to get out of harness. So then it grew thick, it's talking about blizzard conditions there. So again, we've got the weather conditions going on. Although the sun then comes out. That's about it there. He goes into a little bit more detail on this one, doesn't he, about track searching and pulling that sledge. He talks about getting out of harness. So yeah, a little bit more detail in this one, I would say, than in the last slide. So that's the sort of things you might need to look at, differences and similarities. And looking at the facts, there are plenty of facts here. You've got facts about the weather, the distance travelled, the state of Oates, for example, his feet. Ideas, what does it suggest to us? it suggests that the conditions were pretty dreadful. And opinions. In your opinion, how would it have been, for them? So a lot to think about there in both of the slides. Let's look at the assignment for this week then. So in the format of previous weeks, we have 3 tasks. Task 1 and Task 2 are a build up to Task 3. So Task 3 is the one that I will actually be marking on, but I do need you to complete Task 1 and Task 2 as well, so I can see if you've understood the lesson. So I really need to capture that understanding. So Task 1, it says refer back to the video. That's this video. This is your assignment again will be on a Word document. Again, I cannot stress how important it is to open the assignment in Word online, because that way it appears as your own version of the original and not as a separate document. And that's a lot easier to mark than to find other documents. But so if you can, please open in Word online, complete the assignment, close the assignment and hand it in. It'll only be marked if you hand it in, otherwise I won't know if you've completed it or not. Okay, so it says cut and paste these language features under the appropriate heading. Some might go under more than one heading. That's fine, just put it in twice. So you need to, for example, pick up facts and statistics, and you will cut that and paste it into the box marked information. So facts and statistics will go in information. And just do it for all the other things there. So point of view, what are explanations, what are descriptions, what does that go into, which one of those headings. Okay, and then task 2. So task 2, read through the 2 extracts from Scott's diary. See last page, it says. So you don't have to come back to this video. The 2 extracts are actually printed at the end of the assignment. So I'll show you those in a minute. So it says, read through the 2 extracts from Scott's diary and list as many similarities and differences between the information, opinions and ideas he presents as you can. So we looked at that when we were just reading through those extracts. So there are many similarities and differences. So I want you to write them in on the Word document under task 2. And finally, task 3, and that's looking at your own diary entry. But what I'd like you to do is, just as we've just looked at 2 different extracts from a diary, I want you to compare 2 extracts from your own diary. So I want you to write 2 diary entries. They don't have to be one day after the other, consecutive days. I don't have to have that. They could be once last week and once this week, whatever you like. But they have to show a clear difference. So it says, life in lockdown feels very strange and the days all merge into one. Although it feels like every day is the same, something different happens every day, even if you don't always notice it. Write 2 diary entries about 2 different days. What makes the days different is up to you. It might be the weather, something that happened in your home, how you felt, something you ate. Could even be something in the news, anything that you can think of. Success criteria. I keep talking about success criteria. It's very important because this will be shown on an exam, and if you don't complete all the success criteria, you will lose marks, and that's how I'm marking it with the scheme of marking. So remember to include how and why the 2 days are different, how you feel about it, and what hopes you have for a different future. So on each of your diary entries, I want you to include about those 3 different things. So what's different about each one? And when I read the work, I'll be looking for the following. I want a clear difference between the 2 days. And I want you to use information, opinions and ideas to express those differences. So on each of the days, there should be different facts, opinions and ideas. and I want you to write 200 words in total. Half a page would be great. No smaller than font, or rather no bigger than font 14. Had a few crafty ones last week doing font 18. No, doesn't get past me. So maximum font 14, please. Thank you. Okay, so this is what the diary entries look like on your assignment. They'll be one after the other so that you can work on them. And finally, further progress for reading. I know I can't stress enough how important it is to read, and this, if you found this interesting, then please do have a look. So British Library actually have the original diaries from Captain Scott, and many other original manuscripts and books as well. Fantastic place if you can ever visit one day, next to King's Cross St Pancras. But if you can't, you can go on and look at the books as they are there. So there's a website here called Turning the Pages, which is associated with the British Library. And if you click on this link, it will actually load up the actual diary of Captain Scott, so you can actually see the diary and turn the pages. The writing is difficult to read, so there is a transcript of the writing, so you can read it completely. So do have a look, it's worth it. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this week's lesson. I look forward to seeing you next week.